Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Roseville Wrecking Ball. The Roseville Wrecking Ball.
Joshua Shrum. He is a very talented steward, very knowledgeable.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball. This is one of those podcasts where I listen to every episode. I love what he's putting out there.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball. Josh Shrum.
Parcels of Knowledge. Does a fantastic job with that podcast.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball. He is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God. We need Article 8 scholars right now.
Tune into the Parcels of Knowledge podcast while you're on the route. That's the mailman's playbook, brother.
Good morning and welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, that podcast dedicated to delivering knowledge to the city letter carrier with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball. Today we are only at grievance number 113 in that beautiful city of Roseville, Michigan, currently undergoing route count and inspection. And with that being said, today's episode is going to be relevant to that subject. Don't worry, I'm not going to do route counts all week in terms of the episode choices. Tomorrow's episode will be chosen by a poll on our Patreon by the Roseville Wrecking Crew. But please bear with me on this episode. This episode may technically be geared toward steward-oriented people who have, route adjustments coming up. But also, it's also a topic that regular carriers should be interested in, and I hope that they support it so that we can combat management's tactics. But before we get into the meat of the subject, let's first announce that we are having another candidate on this upcoming Saturday. We're slated out until November 2nd. This upcoming Saturday, we will be having Lloyd Doucet from Branch 124, New Orleans, Louisiana. He is going to be running for National AFL-CIO Delegate for the CLC. Lloyd Doucet, I hope I'm getting your name right. They are running for National AFL-CIO Delegate. Please send any question you have for Lloyd over to my email, rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. That is rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. All right, now, without further ado, let's go talk about our main subject, and that is going to be steward time as it pertains to route count and inspections. Now, first, let me preface this. Let me tell you something. I think steward time is something we can use to combat low volume and management's pivoting and runners, because with the crazy amount of runners lately who are not doing the things that you need to do in accordance with the handbooks and manuals, we are seeing routes being cut. Management likes to attribute it to the volume. That's bullshit. Still got to touch every house. I mean, don't get me wrong, volume plays a small factor, but the main factor is we stopped doing the tests to get into the job. We got a different class of people. Management stopped enforcing the rules. And what that means is regular carriers who are new have developed particular habits in terms of skipping and shortcutting, even if they don't even know they're doing it. And if you tell them, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it by the handbooks and manuals, they'll think you're nuts because they haven't been doing that ever since they got hired 5 years ago. So to them, they're not taking shortcuts. They're doing the job as they know it. Management's responsible for this lack of knowledge, and unfortunately, it's leading to our routes being cut. One thing we need is anti-runners, something that can give us more cushion in terms of route adjustment cuts. So not only do we need people who are anti-runners, but in general, one thing that can generate a little bit of that cushion is a lot of people across the nation are not counting their steward time into their routes. And I know management's partially to blame because, of course, they're not going to give it to you. When I informed the route count inspection team that, hey, by the way, you need to be counting that under line 21, the team told me, no, I'm doing that under line 22. My postmaster specifically told me, no, we're doing that under line 22. And they're adamant about making sure it's under line 22, which means it won't be counted toward your route. Not only that, but also the week before count, my management team tried to squash all my union time. They gave me 3 days in a row, which is unusual, so that I wouldn't get hardly any during route count and inspection week, which sounds kind of okay, but it's not when you think about the fact that your steward time should be counted into your time for your route. Your route's supposed to be as close to 8 hours as possible. And when your steward time gets built in, it's best for the whole office, because let's say when they do a route count, they might create an aux route. Well, if your steward time got built in, that aux route could be a regular route. Or if all the stewards in your building, maybe you got 3, had their steward time counted toward their route, well, then maybe in a regular scenario, you'd have your route cut, but in that scenario, you'd save that route from being cut. So let's talk about this. M document 605. I'm famous for quoting that M document. Also, M document 726. I haven't really quoted that one so much, but I prefer 605 anyway, because it's more specific, but it is also more general, if that makes any sense, because it talks about other line 21 items. But either way, you can quote them both. But what I'm here to do today is to tell you your arguments for a case such as this. And the way I'm going to do it is the same way I learn, which is by reading arbitration decisions. So I got 2 arbitration decisions right here, and hopefully you don't mind the vast amount of reading I'm about to do, but I think they're very interesting, and it will help you build your own case for this issue. And if you're not a steward, you can learn about how this issue is articulated and what arguments go into adding steward time to the routes. All right, so this first one is C document 33270. That's C-33270. This is from 2018, and it's out of Connecticut, and it is before Sherry Rose Talmadge. The arbitrator is Talmadge. And let's just, I'm going to go over the award first. Management violated Articles 15 and Article 19 of the National Agreement, as well as the M39 Section 222.214H, when they failed to assign union time as a line 21 item for union steward's time. The union established that the union work performed by the steward at the New Haven GPO was of a reoccurring and necessary nature. Accordingly, the grievance is sustained. For the remedy, 3 hours union time is to be built into steward D'Aliano's assignment, and 1 hour union time is to be built into steward Malinowski's assignment. All right, that's a beautiful award. So here's the stipulated issues, which means I believe that they came to a stipulated agreement about the issue statement. And that is, did management violate Articles 15 and Article 19 of the National Agreement, as well as the M39 Section 222.214H, when they failed to assign union time as line 21 item for union steward's time? And if so, what is the proper remedy? All right, so relevant contractual provisions, manuals, and handbooks. Article 17.4, payment of stewards. Employer authorized payment as outlined above will be granted at the applicable straight time rate, providing the time spent is a part of the employee's or steward's regular workday. Do you hear that? Straight time? That argument's going to help you. And it's talking about above as in the duties of the steward. So it outlines a whole bunch of duties, and it says it will be granted at the applicable straight time, provided the time is spent as part of the employee or steward's regular workday. Handbook M39 222.214H, line 21. Reoccurring office work not covered by form Use comment section to identify each activity. Necessary time must be recorded for miscellaneous office activity not included on any of the lines 1 through 20. This would include miscellaneous review of or other work that may require the carrier's time relating to the handling of undelivered mail. Describe activity performed and time spent. Each time entry is to be verified and initialed by a manager if it is authorized as a reoccurring carrier office work activity. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead and go straight. I'm not going to read the positions of the parties because we kind of already know where we're going with this. But in general, the reason why I read arbitration awards is to hear the position of the arbitrator. And they're going to juxtapose the positions of the parties and go back and forth as to what makes sense to them and what doesn't. So, and then they'll come to the conclusion of how they decided their award. So, discussion. At issue is whether management violated Article 15, Article 19 of the National Agreement, as well as M39 Section 222.214, when they failed to assign union time as a Line 21 item for union steward's time during the route inspection at the New Haven GPO in May 2017. Union met its burden of establishing a violation. The crux of the matter is whether the union stewards at the New Haven GPO perform reoccurring and necessary work that should have been recorded in Line 21 during the week of route inspection. The M39 describes what should be recorded in Line 21. Although Section 222.214H does not reference union work, the 1980 parties at the national level reached a settlement agreement, M Document 605, which states in pertinent part, the parties mutually agree that the following listed work activities may be appropriate for inclusion by the letter carrier for actual time credit on Line 21 of the Form 1838C when such activities are determined to be reoccurring and necessary in the performance of the carrier's office routines. Number 9 would be union steward activities, grievance handling, when necessary and if recurring, weekly or more often. The following guidelines will be applied in implementing this settlement. The appropriateness for granting credit for the listed items on Line 21 or Form 1838C is dependent on a determination that the incident is 1. Reoccurring, 2. Necessary to the successful completion of the activity, and 3. Not otherwise properly included as part of another established time credit on Lines 1 through 20. The union has established that stewards at the New Haven GPO are performing reoccurring and necessary union steward activities daily. Over the course of 2017, they handled over 300 grievances. During the week of route inspection, Malinowski averaged 4 hours and 29 minutes of union time daily. Malinowski, a Formal A representative as well as a steward, investigated grievances and participated in pre-disciplinary investigations on a near daily basis. Malinowski continues to perform these duties on an ongoing basis. During the 2.5 months prior to route inspection, his tax established that he performed an average of 4.17 hours per day of union time. As further evidence of the reoccurring nature of his steward activities, the tax rings reflect that during the week after inspection, Malinowski had 29.88 hours of union work. During the first half of 2017, D'Anliano, a steward and union executive officer, had processed over 100 grievances, monitored the overtime call-in list as well as the daily overtime list, and handled daily overtime grievances. She also handled pre-disciplinary interviews, processed informal A grievances, investigated possible grievances daily, and assisted carriers with their FMLA packages as needed. She continues to perform these duties. The tax rings for the week of inspection showed that she worked 26.98 total hours of union time, averaging 5 hours and 39 minutes of union time daily. As evidence of the reoccurring nature of her union activities, the tax rings for her on Route 47 showed an average of 4.37 hours of union time worked per day during the period preceding the route inspection from March 1 to May 19th. Although management explained that during the route inspection they had changed the steward's Line 21 activities to Line 22 because they had informed by local management that steward duties being performed related exclusively to the ongoing route inspection and thus were not of a recurring nature, the evidence presented at the hearing supports a finding that this was not the case. Malinowski credibly testified that none of the grievance work being handled during the week of inspection was related to the ongoing route inspection. Even if some of the steward's work had been related to the route inspection, the evidence indicates that there was extensive grievance handling that was of an ongoing nature at this post office. In response to the service's concerns about building in route time for grievance handling by a steward carrier, this issue has been previously addressed by other arbitrators who have found that despite the difficulty of building a route in time for grievance handling because of the variation in the actual time used, this does not justify the practice of including this time on Line 22 when such grievance handling is occurring weekly or more frequently. Management has several options to avoid an abundance of non-productive time, should circumstances reduce or eliminate the time needed for this purpose, including adjustment of the route, should the carrier no longer hold the steward's position. All right, so the union has met its burden of proving that management violated the previously mentioned articles. And then they give the award once again. So one of the arguments that people will use is that, hey, it's not fair for the T6 because the T6 would have to work pivots on the union person's day off. Well, guess what? The T6 would have to work pivots even in a non-steward route because sometimes carriers are much slower than their T6. It's not my fault that the routes are built to the regular, not to the T6. That's just how it works. It's the system that you guys both agreed on. Additionally, sometimes they'll use the argument that, hey, what if you bit off the route? As this arbitrator has already said, that still doesn't actually excuse it from being placed on Line 21. It still should be on Line 21, and once again, it's not my fault you built the system the way it is, because if you build it so that the routes have to consistently be 8 hours, well, then you're just going to have to put in the extra resources to make sure that happens. And I don't see anything wrong with that. All you have to do at the end of the day is stop violating, and maybe you won't have so much steward time. All right, so I'm going to go over the next one. This is from Anchorage, Alaska, from 2022. Once again, the grievance was sustained when they failed to include all the reoccurring time for the union steward's hours on Line 21. And the remedy was a cease and desist. And those union steward hours that meet the requirements of Line 21, 2.5 hours, is to be built into the grievance route. All right? So let's read this one. At the time this grievance was filed, James Frankfurt was the regular letter carrier for this particular route. The grievant also concurrently maintained position as NALC stop steward at that same branch, formerly representative for branch 4319. On March 11th, 2018, the grievant communicated with the Postal Service's postmaster, the operations manager, and the installation management's formerly representative, and informed them that his route needed to be properly evaluated and adjusted. On March 18, 2018, the grievant requested a special inspection be conducted on his route. The special inspection was initially declined. The Postal Service determined that the grievant did not qualify for the special inspection based on the actual time used, as using steward time as a justification that the route was out of adjustment is not a qualifier for the 271G inspection. After the grievant filed a grievance, a Step B team determined that the use of steward time does qualify for 271G inspection. As a result, the special inspection was conducted in May of 2019. In conducting the special inspection, however, management did not include on Form 1838 all steward time in its evaluation. Certain union functions were switched from Line 21 to Line 22, with the explanation that those items were not reoccurring and necessary. This gave rise to the current grievance. All right, so continuing on, we're going to go straight to the position of the arbitrator once again. All right, so here goes the analysis and findings. Because the union brought this case, the burden is on the union to prove by a preponderance of evidence that the Postal Service has violated the national agreement. The union alleges that the Postal Service has violated Article 19 of the National Agreement and M39, Section 222.214H. By the way, this is C document 35673, just in case you want to look it up. The primary dispute in this case revolves around whether the agreement performs work that is appropriately interpreted as reoccurring and necessary work, which should, as a result, be counted and recorded on line 21 during a route inspection. The union contends that the grievance work should be included on line 21 and included in the grievance route inspection. The Postal Service retorts that those functions performed by the grievance should be placed on line 22 and excluded from the grievance route inspection. The parties also disagree on the various amounts of time to be associated with not only steward duties, but also additional business associated with the NALC activities and responsibilities. Line 21 states as follows, and it talks about the same thing I had already gone over. The arbitrator notes that comment section of line 21 is quite specific. In addition to each activity being cited, and the time spent for each necessary time must be recorded for miscellaneous activity, and a manager's initial to signify that it is being authorized as reoccurring carrier office work must be provided. It seems obvious that if a manager has not signed off on the work as being reoccurring, then it logically would not be deemed as being reoccurring. The opposite is also true. The actions outlined in the comments are there for a reason and should be undoubtedly clarified to all involved whether work is being treated as reoccurring and necessary. The Postal Service contends that to be counted, local steward activities must be authorized and scheduled on a weekly or daily basis. The Postal Service opines that these activities include reviewing overtime equitability lists, discussing potential issues prior to informal A, and safety inspections. The Postal Service would delegate union steward responsibilities beyond these activities to line 22. The arbitrator recognizes that in cases in which these steps have not been taken to specifically authorize certain union activities, the argument toward treating the work as non-reoccurring or unnecessary may garner some momentum. The national agreement is also instructive in this regard. That contract in Article 17 specifically delineates a broad range of rights for union stewards. The contract does not abrogate these listed rights, and nothing in line 21 abridges these rights which are authorized by the contract. Understandably, some aspects of union stewards' work may be reoccurring, and others may not. In 1980, under M. 605, the Postal Service and Union agreed that line 21 may appropriately include activities that are reoccurring and necessary in the carrier's office work. It also instructive as it provides a list of work activities that are appropriately included on line 21 and includes union steward activities as are plainly included on that list as follows. Union steward activities, grievance handling when necessary and if occurring weekly or more often. The grievant, according to his clock rings for the week of inspection, hours type inquiry report, worked 23.58 hours of steward time during the week of inspection. The record confirms that the grievant worked the following steward hours per day during the week inspection. The Postal Service elected to not subscribe these steward time as a line 21 item. The Postal Service crossed out those times that were listed as line 21 items on Form 1838 and wrote line 22 next to entry. Union points out that the union steward work time information was available to the Postal Service via the TAC rings information. The documentary evidence also reflects that the percentage of work hours of union steward time over 57 pay periods was 62.3%. The grievance hours are also reflected on the USPS employee earnings statements. The Postal Service complains that the grievant has expended over 91% of his total available work days and hours either clocked to union activities or Union LWAP 084 for the National Business Agent or local union activities. The union refutes this assertion and retorts that the 2.5 hours and 5 hours as requested by the union do not equate to 91% of the grievance total work days and hours. The Postal Union did not provide any evidence to support its assertion. The Postal Service also offered the argument that sporadic grievances which occur on a non-reoccurring basis do not qualify as being built into the grievance daily duties. Without specific examples of sporadic grievances, the arbitrator is unable to opine to this contention. It is undisputed that certain union steward functions should be included in line 21. The dissension between the parties arises over which union steward activities should be included. While the Postal Service avers that a narrow approach is appropriate, the union paints with a broader brush which encompasses significantly more union activities. The arbitrator agrees that it would be disingenuous to portend that all duties performed by the union steward are pertinent to the grievance duties as a letter carrier and are of reoccurring nature. That would mean that anything and everything related to the union steward's work would be countable toward the route hours. If that were the case, the letter carrier's mail delivery would diminish exponentially. The arbitrator also acknowledges that not all union time or grievance handling is reoccurring just because a steward clocks to it on a weekly basis. It is also undisputed that nothing in Settlement M605 indicates that the signers intended that all grievance handling and steward time would be considered on line 21. Finally, it is definitely conceivable that some functions of the union steward are not even remotely related to the grievance, letter carrier, clientele, or the Lake Otis station. These functions should undoubtedly be excluded from line 21 considerations. The testimony established, and the arbitrator finds that although it may be challenging to specifically build in route times for grievance handling and other union steward duties due to the inconsistencies in the actual amount of time utilized, this does not compel the transference of time from line 21 to line 22, particularly when the grievance work is occurring weekly or even more often. Ongoing route adjustments after a studied period of time may be a potential solution, among others. However, that is not the particular issue at hand in this current case. Although the agreement provided a record of the various types of union steward and other activities in which he engages, the issue continues to surround whether these various engagements are reoccurring or non-reoccurring. During the hearing, the parties did not present a clear and conclusive delineation of what types of functions are considered to be reoccurring and which are not. This deficit leaves both sides to surmise and pontificate on their respective divergent arguments, and the arbitrator without more is merely left to listen. To determine whether management violated the contract, it must be first determined how to distinguish between reoccurring and non-reoccurring duties. Understandably, the word reoccurring refers to something that occurs repetitively or time and time again. Some of the union steward's job responsibilities fall within this category. Others, without question, do not. The gray areas are those of the grievance responsibilities which may or may not be considered as happening repeatedly or time and time again. The arbitrator has neither the authority nor the know-how to make these distinctions, nor was there sufficient evidence placed on the record to determine what the distinctions are. Union work is regular activity for a union steward. That union work typically includes handling grievances, conducting investigations, participating in PDIs. These functions generally take place on a recurring basis and should be credited on line 21. The arbitrator is in concert with the Postal Service's mention of the need for a careful examination of steward time for a determination of its nature and whether certain tasks constitute a recurring action. Apparently, no such analysis, if already existing, is being relied upon by the parties in this case. If it had been, this dichotomy would have already been resolved. This would also further explain whether the union steward's route time should be increased, whether it's for 0 time, 2.5 hours, 5 hours, or more. The Postal Service raises an interesting argument in distinguishing between duties that are normally performed by the union steward and those which are not. In the Postal Service's opinion, those functions normally performed are grievance handling and informal level activities, which should be listed on line 21. Those duties which are not normally performed and should be excluded from line 21 include working on investigations and grievances at Formal A and utilizing extraneous amounts of time and documents for Informal A. The Postal Service does not see these functions as part of the union steward's daily routine or as a recurring event. In addition, the agreement performs assignments on non-NALC activities and other NELC business. Again, these are activities that are not normal, recurring duties, and they do not have any specific applicability to the grievance route in the Postal Service's estimation. The arbitrator is at a loss in discerning how the Postal Service justifies its distinction between informal A and formal A. The Postal Service also did not provide clarity in determining what constitutes extraneous amount of time and documents for informal A. This appears to be a subjective evaluation. The arbitrator queries how the Postal Service or anyone else might be able to distinguish between what is extraneous and what is not. Furthermore, testimony elicited during the hearing established that documentary evidence does not support any distinction between grievance handling at informal A and formal. Unquestionably, in this case, the union steward wears many hats. In its denial of union steward hours due to the grievance diverse union activities, the Postal Service delineates the many hats worn by the grievant, including his non-station assignments to informal A investigations and other postal activities and advocacy representation, citing these tasks as beyond the grievant's regular and recurring activities. The arbitrator is convinced that some of these obligations may appropriately be placed on line 21 as they are not routine, as previously referenced. The Postal Service contends that the permissive nature of this language provides the Postal Service with an option of whether to include the hours in the union steward's routes. The language in the second paragraph states the parties mutually agreed that the following list of work activities may be appropriate for inclusion. To the Postal Service, this language suggests that it is not necessary or mandatory for inclusion on line 21, but that it could be included. The arbitrator deduces that a rationale interpretation of this and similar provisions might be that the work activities can be included on line 21, but it is not required. The question then becomes, what if they are not included on line 21? Then where can grievance handling be accounted for? That response would be less clear because outside of line 21, only line 22 is marginally on point and available to receive route hours for grievance handling. To further complicate things, line 22 specifically excludes routine work. Because grievance handling is routine work for a shop steward, line 22 would not be applicable, and by default, the grievance handling more appropriately remains on line 21. The union highlights a formal A grievance settlement of November of 2006, which states in compliance with the National Settlement Agreement signed in 1980, the local parties agree that union steward activities, when necessary and if recurring weekly or more often, shall be properly recorded on line 21. This provision does not include what may be interpreted as permissive language and is clear on its face. The Postal Service's claim that the issue is moot due to the grievance relocation is unconvincing. While it is conceivable that the grievant has moved on to another location, the issue of whether the Postal Service properly inspected and evaluated the route time still warrants attention. The arbitrator agrees that adding steward time hours to a specific route may impact that particular route, especially since the now absent grievance, varied responsibilities, and union obligations may no longer be a factor, and the situation would be unquestionably different. However, the issue of whether and how to calculate union steward route hours continues to be an open question. The arbitrator is aware that the grievant apparently did not modify the requested remedies as a result of his change in circumstances, and the arbitrator notes that the plethora of awards and settlements offered by the union in which the Postal Service would not count steward time, and the matters were ultimately resolved with the Postal Service either being ordered or agreeing to, among other things, include necessary and reoccurring time on line 21, accredit the route with additional steward time, or compensate the grievance in lump sums for specific days of the infraction for failing to properly credit union time. Conclusion. The arbitrator's findings are based on the above analysis. While the arbitrator is not persuaded that all of the union steward's time during the week of inspection should be accredited to the grievance route and counted on line 21, she is convinced that some of it should. The arbitrator is not convinced that the only recordings on line 21 are situations that are within the Lake Otis station at the informal A level other than discipline. The arbitrator is also not of the persuasion that all time spent on disciplinary grievances should be annotated on line 22, particularly when it's reoccurring and necessary work. If occurring weekly or more often, it is routine work. The testimony and evidence reveal that none of the guiding principles, whether contract provisions or settlements, limit the grievant, who is a union steward, to handle only a certain level of the grievance procedure, or to work solely on particular types of grievances in order for his hours to be counted on line 21 in the route inspection. The purported distinction between the grievant handling informal A and formal A matters is unsupported and unconvincing. Consequently, the arbitrator finds that the union has met its burden of establishing a preponderance of evidence that a violation has occurred. The arbitrator is persuaded that the Postal Service's failure to count all of the reoccurring union time that should be counted as line 21 and crossing it out as line 22 constitutes a violation. The grievance tendered unrebutted evidence that during the week of inspection he performed both grievance work and investigation work. The grievant established that union work is keenly a part of the union steward's regular and normal function. The reoccurring nature of this function includes handling grievances, conducting investigations, and participating in PDI. These are all tasks that should be appropriately included on line 21. The arbitrator notes that there is a difference between normal routine job duties and extraordinary job functions. The arbitrator is not prepared to draw that proverbial line. To do so would require considerable additional testimony and evidence. It is clear, however, that the grievant was not afforded ample hours to reflect on line 21, his qualifying union steward activities during the route. All right, so that concludes the second arbitration, and I know this has been a long time, but that tells you what exactly you should be prepared for in terms of the arguments. So you're going to have to determine what is reoccurring work, and then you're going to have to prove that. And if the post office actually tries to prove that it's not reoccurring and they're successful, you may have an issue. Either way, I think we should utilize this a lot more often than we do. A lot of stewards might say, hey, I'm sitting out on this one because I want the overtime. Well, you kind of owe it to your station. You need to include it on line 21 because we don't have an option to follow the contract. We have an obligation to uphold the contract. And in doing so, you should be steadfast, holding to the contract and making your steward time part of the route's value. Because if you're not, let's say, for example, I work 12 hours a week on average on union steward time. That's 12 hours a week. So if you divide that by the amount of days, that's about 2 hours of time off of my route that could be incorporated to our aux route, and it would become a route. I'm currently working on making sure that this happens, that they include it on my line 21. Of course, just like in these cases, they are redlining it. I've only had one day so far. That was Saturday. My NS day was Monday, but today is my day of inspection. All union time I'm going to be doing today will be questioned as to whether or not it's going to be line 21, and if it's not, there will be a grievance filed. So hopefully you learned something valuable today. Don't forget to send me questions for Lloyd Doucet. Hopefully I said that name right. RosevilleWreckingBall@yahoo.com. Send them right there. And as always, have a good day.
If these guys are getting educated, we will be in big trouble.
Management's been weighing you down like a bag of wet catalogs, but you don't gotta take it. You strap on the elbow of education, dig it?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Roseville Wrecking Ball. The Roseville Wrecking Ball.
The Roseville Wrecking Ball is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God, we need Article 8 scholars right now. The grievance genius, the Roseville Wrecking Ball, doing amazing work.
Tune into the Parcels of Knowledge podcast while you're on the route. That's the mailman's playbook, brother.